Hey guys, BJTHEBRAVE here, back with another meta report for Warpforge, and we have had the data through from EG. So I wanted to kind of take you through and have a little look at what the stats are telling us. This won't be too long of a video, but I do think there's quite a few cool things to point out. So basically what they're saying is, obviously the Gene Stealers have arrived and they're doing pretty well, that the Ultramarines have really suffered with the recent nerf, and the Eldar are somewhat surprisingly, the top faction. Now, I think the first thing to consider is when we talk about top faction, you have to consider all of the warlords, right? So, like Galaron in Chaos, for example, is one of the worst performing lords. So, therefore, the faction score is going to be pulled down for everyone who plays Galaron. So, I do find it more useful sometimes to kind of look at the actual warlord stats themselves. But let's jump on in and have a look. So, this is kind of like the faction performance overall win rate. So this is obviously all ranks, beginners through to expert level, all of that jazz. Yeah, we can see that the most played faction, as always, is Chaos, with a massive 19.9%, I think that's saying. Also, Gene Stealer cults have been picked up quite well. Still a lot of Ultramarines being played, despite the fact that, you know, they're not in the best position, I'm not going to lie. Anyway, so moving on, let's take a look. So when we're talking legendary division, which when you're thinking about like the meta is often a good place to look, because that's where everybody's got all of the good cards and the better decks, and you're also competing against people who know the game well and things like that. So you really start to see kind of like what the meta is. Now, according to this, in terms of factions, and bearing in mind what I said earlier, again, we have the Black Legion, the most highly played. Very, very close in second place. We've got Eldar and Gene Stealers. Now, there was a really important buff to Anvia at the start of the season, and a lot of people. There hasn't been many buffs to Eldar, remember. So a lot of people jumped on. I can remember week one, lots and lots of people were playing Anvia. So the play rate went up massively, and it was very powerful. Anvia was a really good performing warlord, and so the win rate went up as well. So we can see we've got Simharm, we've got the Tyranids, and then obviously Orkz were coming in at third. They were also very powerful at the start of the season. And then we sort of hit this mid-season where the meta kind of started to change, and that was because people were gathering the Gene Stealer cards, and I think we discovered the Uprising combo, which is very powerful, so people were able to play that. And at the same time, the Sautek Dynasty, where people were playing and testing a lot of stuff, because if you remember, the Conqueror, Impeccable Conqueror, got a buff, so people were testing and trying a lot of stuff, probably losing a lot. And then, again, in this midpoint of the season, where people were seeing all this Eldar being played and stuff, they started playing Scarabs. So we saw two decks really rise in the midpoint of the season, which were Scarabs and Gene Stealers, and so I think that what will have happened is that the play rate will have dropped off a little bit towards the end, and that's probably why the win rate wasn't harmed as much. But let's dive into the warlords, because it might make a little bit more sense. Now, again, if we look at the overall performance, we can see that Swarmlord and the new Primus Safa Rihanna doing very, very well indeed, and of course Anvia with the buff also right up there, along with the usual suspect Abaddon. Zephyr just continues to amaze me. Zephyr just always seems higher on these reports than I always imagine. But one thing I do want to point out, very nice to see Junith finally got a Sisters of Battle with a very, very positive win rate. But let's look at the legendary division, because this is where, for me, this is where we get the best read on what the meta was. Okay, so we can see we've got quite a nice spread of play rate, which is kind of interesting in itself. Vara has gone from being the top warlord last season to the very bottom warlord, which is really interesting. All you saw was Vara Tigerius in the top 50 last season, and look at that, all the way down to the bottom. And yeah, let's have a look at what's winning. So obviously Swarmlord came out actually just on top. That doesn't surprise me. Swarmlord was consistently good, and it switched mid-season to become more aggressive to kind of deal with the GSC combo and the Scarab deck as well. So I think Swarmlord had a good season overall. Brook was very strong early on, but then had bad matchups into into the Scarabs and into the GSC, so will have dropped off towards the end of the season. Although I don't know how many people started playing the Green Horde version, which I put a video out about, which actually kind of was okay against GSC in particular, because you could just let them play the combo and then you just combo with the green horde and you can kind of clear their board. So I don't know if that's it, but I suspect it's more that people played it a lot less. I mean, look at that compared to Abaddon. I imagine people just stopped playing Grook a lot more towards the once that mid-season meta shift happened. Rihanna, very, very high. Again, this is the Uprising combo deck's fault, because that deck is, well, it's super powerful. I mean, that combo is one of the most powerful things in the game. If your opponent hasn't got an answer for it, and there are only a few answers, if they haven't got the answer, then it's kind of GG. And as we already said, Anvia was quick out the blocks, I think, last season. Probably racked up a very high win rate early on in the season. And I imagine that, as I say, they probably got played a lot less in the last week, the 2 weeks. And that drop in play rate is probably why the win rate didn't suffer quite as much as it would have done if it was constantly queuing into GSC combo and Scarabs. Other than that, Junith doing incredibly well. Really cool to see a Sisters of Battle, and yeah, Junith is one of the warlords that I've really been digging into at the start of this season, because I've just finally got the level 40 on the Forge, so I've got that defense, so I'm really going to kind of deep dive on Junith early season. And actually, quite nice to see Onvar back up there doing well. I mean, I personally didn't play Onvar as one of my 4 factions, but I know some of my teammates did in the Alliance and done very well. Slither in particular has done very well with Onvar. And so, yeah, really cool to see that Onvar can compete. Again, you can see from the 2.9%, not a very highly played warlord, but actually pretty powerful in terms of the win rate. Some usual suspects there with Abaddon and Galen, although interesting to see, this might be the first season where Galen is the worst of the Eldar warlords, so that's quite interesting to note. Also quite cool to see Warshaper over 50% at Legendary, proving that actually that deck is now pretty good and that the buff that they made was effective. And what I do really like about this season and about this meta report is, if you kind of look, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. See, we got something like 16 warlords over a 50% win rate. And I think this is quite nice advertisement for the new ladder system and the variety that's created. And it's really, really nice to see such a high number in that 50 to 60% win rate. That's usually a sign of a healthy meta. The only thing that kind of let the kind of feel of it, the experience down, I think, last season is just that there were 2 decks that were quite binary that were driving the meta, and that was the Uprising combo and the Scarab. So despite the stats being quite healthy, I do hope they address those in the balance report, because they're not particularly healthy decks to have the meta kind of hanging off, if you like. They were the decks driving the meta as people were trying to respond to it, and the problem is it alienates a lot of stuff because it's kind of very binary in its win con. So that's the only thing I would say. But in terms of just the raw numbers, really nice to see such a high number of warlords, that 50 to 60%. So yeah, really, really cool. We talked about a lot of the new warlords still not making it in the bottom, and obviously some of the like Stagstroke and Galaron, and not doing too good. Calgar also dropped quite a lot. Erica's still not where it needs to be, and even Nemesis with all the buffs still coming in at a 45% win rate, which is a bit disappointing. In terms of draft, if you're a big draft player, really wanted to kind of shout out Nas, Magus Nas actually coming in as the top draft player, and that kind of makes sense because Magus can always choose the... troops are much more important in draft, just good solid bodies, and Magus can always basically plug the gap, go like, what do I need this turn, and get on next turn, and get the best body, and also get it at a kind of slightly discounted price, right, at the -1. So, yeah, just a really, overall, really solid add to draft there, and of course, people, Swarmlord coming in as the second best. So, yeah, that's the meta report this month, guys. I hope we see a bounce patch soon, and I'm hoping that they don't overdo it on GSC combo. Really just think that the hybrid is probably the biggest problem card. You could maybe make Infestation make a little tweak to that card, but I actually not even sure that's needed. That if you fix the hybrid, but the scarabs are particularly binary, and I am worried that they won't touch it just because we didn't actually comment on that, did we? Orkz actually came in with only a 50.5% win rate, and people might be a bit surprised about that. But as I say, the meta did get teched quite heavily to fight against scarabs, and a lot of people probably didn't have like the best scarab deck or really know how to play them. So I'm not overall surprised that it's slightly lower than I was anticipating, because people teched heavily to play against it. But it is important to point out that despite that, this is still the deck that the meta that was driving the meta. Yeah, the whole meta was kind of shaped around this by the end of the season. So there we go, guys. That is the meta report. If you like that, please hit the like button down below. And also, if you enjoyed this content, maybe check out one of these two videos for some more Warpforge. Until next time, guys, take it easy.